So I recently played through Astro Bot and I loved every second of it. For those that missed the game, Astro Bot is a Sony published 3D platformer on the PS5 and the game is phenomenal. I pretty much inhaled it in 2 sittings. It's the most pure fun I've had with a game in ages. From the varied power-ups to the insanely spectacular boss fights to creative stages, it's really something special, a great game that I greatly enjoyed. But playing Astro Bot was not only a ton of fun, it also reminded me of something. It reminded me of how much I love 3D platformers. From N64 games like Banjo Kazooie to the Mario games to great indie titles like Ahead in Time. You know, I just love it to jump around in colorful environments and to explore fun virtual spaces. 3D platformers used to be incredibly popular in the early 2000s, but they then slowly fell out of favor. Astro Bot managed to scratch my 3D platformer itch that I didn't even know was still tingling. So I wondered if this was a me thing or if other people were having a similar experience with the game, and thus I hopped over to Metacritic to look up the scores for Astro Bot there. And what I saw there almost threw me out of my chair. You see, when I look something up on Metacritic, I usually take the user review scores much more seriously than the scores of official review sites. I just find that the user review scores are a lot more useful since they're a lot less dependent on other industry trends. So the thing with aggregated user ratings is that they tend to be a lot lower than the aggregates of official review sites. That's mainly because users don't shy away from scoring a game with a 0, something official review sites pretty much never do. Because of this, it almost never happens that a game cracks a user rating of 9 or higher. Just to give you a feeling for user ratings, here's the user metascore for some of the most beloved games of the decade. Smash Bros. Ultimate sits on a user score of 8.7. Breath of the Wild hit one of 8.8. Stardew Valley also has a user rating of 8.8. The Witcher 3 has an incredible rating of 9.1, and Hollow Knight also hit 9.1. Alright, so this finally brings us to the reason why I almost fell out of my chair when I saw the user aggregate for Astro Bot, because at the time of writing this, Astro Bot is sitting at a Metacritic user score of 9.4, and that is with over 3,000 reviews. A Metacritic user rating of 9.4 is pretty much unheard of. So the very fact that I just drew attention to this high rating is probably going to tank the score soon. But the fact remains, Astro Bot ended up having a 9.4 user score on Metacritic after thousands of reviews. People truly love this game. People have been craving this game. But if people love this modern 3D platformer so much, then this raises a really weird question. If people are so immensely happy to finally get a decent 3D platformer again, then why didn't we get one earlier? Why are there almost no 3D platformers being made anymore? What happened to this genre? Why did the big publishers almost entirely abandon the genre? Why did indies not pick up the torch like they did with so many other genres? What is going on here? So I began to look into this question, not knowing what I was about to get myself into. And this mess I got myself into is pretty much what this video is all about. So in this video we're going on a journey. We're going to investigate why 3D platformers are so rare nowadays, even though they were one of the most popular genres not too long ago. We will try to figure out how and why this fall from grace happened. We will explore what possibly caused this shift in the gaming industry and what the future for the genre may look like. We have several decades of games media ahead of us. Before we jump in, just one more thing. This video contains mild gameplay spoilers for Astro Bot. Don't worry, those aren't mild gameplay spoilers in the background yet, that's just gameplay that is spoiled because it is too mild. My name is Ceave, you're watching Ceave Perspective, a place that hopes to give an interesting perspective on great games. This is the murder of the 3D platformer.
That's in my hair, it's not meant to be out there. Angry chicks, mean and bad, sent by bird to drive me mad. You help me, I help you. You know what you've got to do. If you help me, then I'll help you. You know what you've got to do.
The morning of the 17th of October 2022 had been a rather unusual one in the otherwise sleepy village of Seiersberg. Usually, there is not much of interest going on in Seiersberg, a small town on the outskirts of Graz in southern Austria. But this morning was different. Most people on the highway probably didn't even realize that something was off. It was just another Monday morning. People were driving through the dense autumn fog towards the city, like every day. They were driving to get to work or to bring their kids to school. not noticing what they just drove underneath. Only those people that looked up noticed that something strange was dangling from the bridge that led over the highway, something that really should not dangle there. And it were those people, the people that did look up, that eventually would call the police. The year is 2002. It's a wild time. Global politics are still busy with the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Apple just released a second generation iPod, a device with the incredible storage capacity of 20 GB. U2 performed at the halftime show of the Super Bowl that the New England Patriots would win. The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers is running in the cinemas, and in the gaming world, something interesting is happening. Over the past couple of years, a lot of new gaming franchises have been popping up, and a lot of other games are getting sequels. Jak and Daxter are jumping through colorful environments for the first time. Ratchet and Clank are firing their guns for the first time together. Banjo and Kazooie just returned for Banjo Tooie. Crash just defeated that wildly misunderstood Dr. Neo Cortex again in Crash 3. Spyro the Dragon is at it again in Spyro 3. Croc's last fight against Baron Daunt isn't even 5 years old yet. Gex returned this time in the third dimension, and that's not all. Mario is jumping around in 3D, as he always has, but he's joined by gaming icons that aren't necessarily known for 3D platforming. Sonic is racing through three-dimensional environments in Sonic Adventures 2. The Kong family is hippily hopping through a three-dimensional adventure. Kirby and Rayman decided to give the 3D fun a try. Heck, even good old Pac-Man decided to leave his well-earned pension for one final game series and returned for Pac-Man World. In the early 2000s, 3D platformers are at their absolute peak. New franchises are popping up right and left, and even gaming icons that were not known for three-dimensional platforming are suddenly joining in on the three-dimensional fun. And the games are selling like hot fuzzies. Many 3D platformers of this time can be found high up on the list of the best-selling games of the entire console generation. It is a huge three-dimensional party. A party that was about to come to a sudden halt. We're back at the highway bridge. The local police forces soon realized that they would need support from the bigger police department of the city nearby to crack this case. And even the veteran policeman of the city had never before investigated a crime scene like this one. You see, people that looked up while driving towards the bridge that morning saw a terrifying image. Someone had hung something off of the bridge the night before. Something dead. High up in the air, above all the cars, there was a cadaver dangling. A cadaver of a slaughtered pig. But it was not just a dead sow that was hanging there. Someone had actually painted the entire sow red. The night before, someone slaughtered a pig, painted it blood red, and then drove it to the bridge to hang it off there, so that everyone driving to work would see it the next morning. Why in the world would anyone do something like this? The year is 2024. Wall Street is celebrating new record highs following an unprecedented rally due to hopes in AI technology. The Harris and Trump campaigns are getting ready for the final sprint leading up to the election in November, and everyone, globally, is still mentally recovering from the fact that the 2024 Eras Tour concert in Vienna by Taylor Swift had to be cancelled due to terror threats. So how are 3D platformers doing? Well, the world of 3D platforming has changed a lot, yet weirdly, it is still the same. Here's the thing, there hasn't been any new significant 3D platforming IP in years. The biggest and best known 3D platformer is Mario Odyssey, but this game is already roughly 7 years old and Mario is alone on a white floor. Rayman and Donkey Kong returned to their original 2 dimensions. Jak and Daxter are long retired. Pac-Man is long dead, but the genre has not disappeared entirely. There are still new 3D platformers being made that are still selling like hotcakes. And those new 3D platformers are the same platformers from 20 years ago. The most successful games in the genre in the past decade have been one-to-one remakes of games from 20 years ago. The 3D Mario All-Stars collection sold almost 9 million copies. The Spyro trilogy sold 10 million. And the remake of the first 3 Crash Bandicoot games sold an insane amount of 20 million copies. Here's where this gets really strange. It is only the remakes of 3D platformers that seem to sell well. Crash 4, for example, the entry in the series that followed the success of the remake of the original trilogy, ended up only selling a quarter as many copies as the remake did. Apart from Mario, only remakes seem to sell well in the genre. The list of the 40 best-selling PS4 games, for example, only includes 3 platformers. One is the Crash remake, one is a remake of the first Ratchet & Clank game, and the only original IP on this list is, God help us, Knuck. Over on the Switch, the situation is only slightly better. Apart from the 2 Mario games and Kirby, there isn't a single 3D platformer that made the cut in the list of the 95 best-selling Switch games. Within 2 decades, the genre almost disappeared. The most successful new 3D platforming IP in the last decade was probably Knuck. The most successful games in the genre over the past 2 decades were remakes of 2-decade-old games. There hasn't been any new significant IP in years, until very recently. So why are we talking about a red-painted sow that someone hung over a highway in a video about 3D platformers? One might ask. Well, you see, this sow wasn't dangling there as a crude joke, nor was the date an accident. The person that hung the slaughtered pig from the bridge had a very good reason to do so. And this reason is surprisingly relevant if you want to understand the fate of the 3D platformer. Because this sow was dangling there because of a game, a very special one. The 3D platformer genre appeared to be dead until all of a sudden, Sony dropped Astro Bot out of nowhere. Astro Bot, a first-party Sony-published 3D platformer that reviewed phenomenally. It is a game that everyone who played it seemed to love. It is the first time in many years that a newish IP entered the world of 3D platforming. It is a newish IP that fans of the genre have been dreaming of for years. And this new IP is introduced with a big marketing push by one of the biggest players in the entire industry. Just as an example, Sony bought Astro Bot commercials to run in the background of every Champions League game. The Champions League is the biggest tournament in club soccer. Sony really believes in the game. They are really pushing it. And yet, it still isn't selling that great. So we don't have that much data on the sales numbers of the game yet, but the few key data points that we have point to the game not doing that hot. It had a terrible opening week in Japan, selling only roughly 13,000 physical copies there, and it sold only about 21% more than the Ratchet & Clank games on the PS5 did in its opening week in the UK, which may sound respectable until we take into consideration that Ratchet & Clank released in the first year of the console's lifecycle and thus released to a much smaller install base, and that Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart ended up selling only roughly 3 million copies to begin with. For comparison, God of War Ragnarok sold over 5 million copies. In its launch week, it ended up selling about 15 million copies total. Horizon Forbidden West sold 8.5 million copies. Spider-Man 2 sold 11 million. While we do not know yet how many copies Astro Bot ends up selling, we already know with almost certainty that it won't even get close to those numbers. And this is where all of this becomes mysterious and complicated. You see, if the game is made by one of the biggest publishers out there, if it reviewed great and the people that ended up buying it truly loved it, if there is a marketing push for the game, and if the people that handle the marketing have successfully sold many different games in different genres before, yet the game still does not sell that well, then why do people not buy it? And the answer is obviously that people are not that interested in the product in the first place. Or in other terms, people, as a generalized mass market, really seem not to be as interested in 3D platformers anymore as they are in shooty story games. Astro Bot kind of proves that people really are not that interested in the genre, that there are truly less people out there that want to play a 3D platformer than there were 2 decades ago. But that raises the question of why? What changed? Well, if you want to understand why the 3D platformer fell out of popularity, we have to ask a different question first. We have to answer the question of why people prefer some genres over others in the first place. And I mean this literally. What kind of games are the most played ones, and why do people prefer to play those genres over others? What is it that draws people to certain types of games over other types? What do people seek in games? Why do people even boot up a game in the first place? If we want to understand why people seem no longer to be interested in 3D platformers, then we have to understand why people play the games that they play in the first place. And to understand this, we have to talk about the Slaughtered Sow that was dangling below the bridge. The year is 2007. Britney Spears just shaved her head. Everyone is making their first experiences with social media on the platform of the future, MySpace. A new and exciting website called WikiLeaks just published classified documents about Guantanamo Bay. And in Graz, the city in which the pig will dangle, 15 years later, a rivalry came to an end. You see, for decades, two soccer clubs from this town have been playing in the highest soccer league in Austria. And as anyone who lives in a city with two rivaling soccer teams that both play in the same league can attest to you, it is a rivalry otherwise only found among the eposes of the ancient Greeks, between Tom and Jerry, or in the lovely world of gangster rap. But this rivalry was about to hit a pause button, because one of the city's clubs went bankrupt following a series of economic mishandlings. The Graz Athletic Club, one of the two rivaling soccer teams, went bankrupt, while the other one, the SK Sturm Graz, stayed in the highest league. But this is just the beginning of the tale, because following this bankruptcy, something really unusual happened. The bankrupt team started anew in the lowest possible soccer league and slowly but steadily began to climb back up the ranks. For over a decade, the two once rivaling teams did not play against each other until the fateful week in October of 2022. In this week, the once rivaling teams were to play against each other for the very first time in 15 years. And it was in this very week that the sow got hung over the highway. Someone hung it there exactly because of this game. Fans of the club that stayed in the highest league had bought a slaughtered pig the night before the game. They had painted it red, the colors of the rivaling team, and then they hung the cadaver over the highway for everyone to see. The message being pretty clear: we're going to grill you, you friendly pigs. Alright, so I can already hear what at least one of you wonderful people is currently wondering. Why is he snorting about this pig in a video about 3D platformers? Is this going to be boring? Didn't I just pick a video about 3D platformers? To which I say, hogwash. You see, the very fact that someone was willing to hang a sow over the highway to send a message to a rivaling soccer team raises a question. It raises the question of why anyone in their right mind would ever do this. And I don't mean this as a rhetorical question, I mean it literally. What is going on in the human psyche that we are capable of becoming so invested in the outcome of a game that at least some of us feel justified to do the swine over the bridge thingy because of it? You know, the sow is just one anecdote. And the main reason I'm retelling this tale is because it is my soccer team that metaphorically was dangling off of this bridge that morning. But the list of soccer fans or fans of any sports team that felt justified to do insanely dumb, hurtful, and often even dangerous things to fans of the other teams is so long that we almost take it for granted. Why? What the heck is going on that allows some of us to become so fixated over the outcome of a match of 22 grown-up men that are playing ball with each other? What draws us to sports? And what has all of this to do with 3D platformers again? Well, I believe that there are similarities between what draws us to sports and what draws us to video games. Similarities that may help us understand why people prefer different genres over others. But one tangent after the other. So why do people support sports teams? Well, the question is obviously complicated and we can't answer it in its entirety here. But I think there are 3 things that we can identify that may help us solve this riddle. First, supporting a sports team is a cooperative environment. You see, people have a team. Within this team, they are within a cooperative system. We have friends who are fans of the same team. There are fan clubs that organize travels to away games. There is a stadium filled with other people supporting the same team as we do. It is a cooperative environment where a bunch of people decide to work together to achieve a certain goal. Which brings us to the second thing that may draw us to sports. It is a competitive environment. Quite obviously, our team plays against another. There is a game that follows a set of rules and that is regularly played against another team that we try to defeat. And finally, there is the third thing that I think might be part of what draws us to sports. The goal in itself. Something we and our team tries to achieve, something we are progressing towards. Be it the goal of winning the league this year, or getting as far as possible in tournament, or developing new players, or just performing better this year than the year before. There is always something a team is trying to progress towards, and some failure state it is trying to avoid. And this is where things become interesting. You see, a sports league is a system in which people cooperatively compete against someone else with a bigger goal in mind. And I think it is those three elements that cause the magic to happen: the competition, the cooperation, and the bigger goal. Because systems that are embedded within those three things are capable of creating an illusion of importance. Systems that are cooperative, competitive, and that work towards a goal are systems that we can describe meaning onto. And systems that create this illusion of importance have an extremely strong pull. People can be entertained by something like this for years. They actually can be entertained by it for their entire lives. Heck, I've been visiting the soccer stadium regularly for a quarter of a century now. Such systems can become so meaningful to people that they no longer notice how dumb it is to hang a swine off of a highway bridge. People can take such systems so seriously that they develop moral ideas around them, to the point that sometimes fans of one team feel justified to hurt people just because they are fans of another team. Sports have such a strong pull on people that some of us are able to completely detach from reality over it. And I don't mean that in a judgmental sense, by the way. I love sports, and I'll probably still swear to you on my deathbed that the 11 people wearing the red shirts are the best, and that people that think that the 11 people wearing the black shirts are better are delusional and morally spoiled. I just think it is interesting that I'm able to come to those certainly true conclusions over, well, a ball game. I think it is the cooperation within a competition towards a goal that makes this possible. And with this, things become interesting. Because with this, it is finally time for us to leave the fascinating world of small-town soccer rivalries behind and to actually talk about some games for once. Let's watch an educational video about game mechanics. The strip mine is the backbone of every modern Minecraft server. Early in the morning, while the postman and the milkman are delivering the letters and the milk, the player comes down here with a clear goal in mind: finding diamonds. Dozens of blocks below the sunlight, he begins the day's work. Block by block, he removes the cobblestone. Block by block, he digs through the ground, often for thousands of blocks. It is monotonous work, but it is all worth it when he finally finds what he's looking for. Life in the Ark is dangerous for the local tribes. Not only is it rare to find food, but the tribesmen themselves have to be careful not to end up eating themselves. Thousands of dangerous dinosaurs are living on the island with them. The savages need to come up with unique strategies to survive under these harsh conditions. They tame the very thing that tries to eat them. They live alongside nature, with sticks and stones to knock the wild beasts unconscious and feed them narcotic berries and fresh meat. A boring and tedious process, often taking hours. But in the end, it is worth it. After taking care of the wild beast for hours, the dinosaur finally follows the commands of their new owner. The day of the farmers in the Stardew Valley always begins with the same task. Early in the morning, he gets out of bed, and after watching the weather report, he picks up his most precious tool, his watering can. And then he puts the tool to work. One by one, he waters his crops. A tedious process, often taking several minutes, robbing him of most of his energy. It is only when it is raining that he spared the chore of watering his plants. It is only on rainy days that Stardew Valley's farmers get to do something less tedious, like digging for minerals in a mine or fishing the entire day for riverfish. The Hearthstone Battlegrounds are a cruel place. 8 people meet up in a tavern where they buy minions, who then will fight in battles against the other contestants' minions. The minions' owners just sit on the sideline and watch as their minions claw it out against each other. Their only contribution is to reinforce the minions after each battle. Alrighty right, so why do we waffle about strip mining in Minecraft, taming a dinosaur in Ark, watering our plants in Stardew Valley or Hearthstone's Battleground mode? Well, here's the thing. All of those 4 things have something in common. something quite interesting. They all feature terrible moment-to-moment gameplay. Strip mining in Minecraft is literally holding down a single button while we hope that a diamond or whatever we're looking for pops up. Sometimes for hours straight. Taming a dinosaur in Ark is pretty much juggling two timers, one that keeps the dino unconscious, one that slowly tames it. Once again, for potentially hours. Watering plants in Stardew Valley is a literal chore that we have to do every day, at least during the first year. And Hearthstone Battleground mode doesn't even feature real gameplay at all. All that we do while playing the mode is to quickly make a bunch of choices every couple of minutes and then to wait and see how our choices play out. So why do I bring this up? Well, because of something strange that I've been thinking about a lot lately. You see, if someone were to ask me what my favorite game is, then depending on my mood, I'd answer something like Outer Wilds or Majora's Mask or maybe Hollow Knight or Bloodborne or Sekiro or something along those lines. But here's the thing, even though I think of those games as my favorite games, I probably spent more of my limited lifetime strip mining in Minecraft than I spent time playing those games together. I probably spent more time taming dinosaurs in Ark than I spent playing my favorite games. I certainly spent more time in World of Warcraft or in Hearthstone's Battlegrounds mode than I spent with Mario games, even though I certainly think that Mario games are much more worthwhile and the much better games. And to be quite honest, I probably spent more time exploiting the alchemy system in Skyrim or doing virtual chores in games like watering my plants in Stardew Valley than I spent time playing the Zelda series. And that's strange, isn't it? Why do I spend so much more time with games that feature gameplay that I don't think is very special? Why do I spend hours of my precious lifetime strip mining in Minecraft or doing the same loot runs in Diablo or complaining about the same useless mid lane in League of Legends every game? Why do I choose to do this? And I don't mean this as a moral question again, you know? I don't think that I'm wasting my time in these games or anything. I mean it as an honest question. Why do I choose to spend my time like this? What is it that ultimately draws me to those games over others? Not just over other games, but in general. Why do I choose to strip mine over reading a book? Why do I choose to play Diablo till 2 o'clock in the morning instead of watching a show? It certainly isn't because the gameplay is so exceptional. But what is it then that draws me to those games? And I think at least part of the answer to this question is that all those games and many other extremely popular games out there give me the feeling that playing them serves a higher purpose. They give me a feeling that interacting with the game has meaning in some way that goes above what I actually do in the game. Those games somehow justify within their own systems that I spend my time with them. You know, the reason why I spend time with Hearthstone's Battlegrounds or in League of Legends is because I enjoy the competition. I want to win and I want to ultimately become better at the game. And every match is an opportunity to get better at it. The reason why I strip mine in Minecraft or grind gold in World of Warcraft is because I want those resources for a cooperative goal. Because we're doing a cool building project together on the server and need iron and redstone or whatever. Or because I'm in a guild and we want to kill a raid boss together and the gold grinding gives all of us this small advantage. And the reason why I water my plants in Stardew Valley is because I need the money that I get once I sell the grown crops so that I can build a coop and then not only have to water the crops each morning, but also get to feed the chicken. You see, the thing is the following. Why do we do chores in games, even if the task itself is not very enjoyable in the moment-to-moment gameplay? And if we break it down, I believe we end up with 3 reasons why we may choose to spend time with games, even if the gameplay is not enjoyable on a moment-to-moment basis. 3 reasons we already encountered before. We either do it for a cooperative reason, because we cooperate with other people and thus strip mining for hours actually means something for other people we play with as well, or we may do it for competitive reasons. You know, we tolerate the social experiment that is the average LoL game because we want to get better at it, with the ultimate goal of becoming so good at it that we dominate over others. Or we accept the struggle in a game as a means to progress towards a state that we actually want to reach, which is why I'm more than happy to water my precious strawberries every morning, or why I'm babysitting the dumb Pteranodon for an hour and a half in Ark. I believe these 3 things, cooperative, competitive, competitive or progression-based systems are something that draws us to games in a way that far exceeds the joy that we get by playing a game in a moment. You see, when we play a game, we don't necessarily do it because we actually enjoy the moment-to-moment gameplay. What we actually seek is for our time spent with the game to mean something in a bigger context. It is similar to what we just speculated may be part of the reason why so many people are so drawn to supporting sports teams. You know, I quit League of Legends years ago because honestly I just can't handle this level of toxicity on a daily basis. But back when I was playing, I did not only just play the game, I also watched guides of people on how to play certain heroes. I played together with friends in a team. We would meet up when it was a big tournament and watch it together and then chat about the best plays. I would follow the patch notes closely and then read up discussions about them on Reddit and so on. The same is true for Minecraft. I'm still following Minecraft patch notes, and whenever a new update drops, I end up going on a rant with a friend on how terrible Microsoft is handling modern Minecraft and how much better mod it is. I read up on guides about different Diablo builds when I play the game. I research certain card combinations when I play Hearthstone. I look up cool builds when I play Valheim and so on. You know, the games that people tend to spend the most time with, at least as I observe it in myself and around me, are all games that are either cooperative or competitive games that have communities formed around them. Or it's games that are incredibly good at giving our actions within the game meaning within the context of the game. Even if the gameplay in those games is strip mining or taming a dinosaur or whatever it is that people actually do in Fortnite. The big point here is that, at least as I see it, most people that play games aren't drawn to the game because of the game aspect. Instead, we're often much more drawn to the systems surrounding the game or a feeling of progression within a game. We're drawn to games that make us feel like our time spent with them is meaningful in some way, but we're not necessarily drawn to games for the joy of the moment. And this is where the world's second most famous Bandicoot enters the picture again. You see, the fact that it might not always be the moment-to-moment gameplay that draws us to games, but that we're often drawn to them because we seek a feeling of our interactions with the game maturing in a greater context, is the very thing that I suspect to be at the center of the 3D platformer's downfall. Alrighty right, so gentle ladies, gentlemen, and gentle people in general, with this we finally have all the puzzle pieces on the table. With this, it is finally time for us to connect the dots. It is finally time to actually answer the question of what killed the 3D platformer. There is one thing in the history of video games that makes the medium unique in comparison to all the other media that we consume. You see, video games as mass media, especially console gaming, is quite unique in how the media grew into the mainstream, because console gaming began as media almost exclusively catering towards children, and then the medium grew up alongside them. You know, when cinemas first pop up, they did not exclusively focus on the target demographic of 6 to 18-year-olds. Neither did television, or novels, or radio, or the internet when they first appeared. But console gaming did. All early video game consoles were almost exclusively marketed towards children, beginning with the Atari days up to well into the PS2 era. The main demographic for games were children and teens, but those kids don't stay kids forever. They grow up, and as they grow up, their taste in games grows up as well. So there's obviously no singular point where all of this happens at once. It's a slowly moving process. But around the early 2000s, there seems to be a tipping point. Around this time, grown-up gamers slowly start to become the majority in the console gaming world. It is around this time that Wind Waker got a huge backlash for not being mature enough. It is around this time that Rare released games like Conker's Bad Fur Day that were catering towards more mature audiences in a really unique way. It is around this time that the Grand Theft Auto series exploded in popularity, and it is exactly around this time that the 3D platformers peak. And within the next 10 years, the genre pretty much died a slow death. After the early 2000s, 3D platformers slowly came to an end as other trends in gaming slowly began. So most of you wonderfully smart viewers probably already know where this is heading, but to connect the dots. 3D platformers are typically games that are played just for the joy of the moment. 3D platformers typically don't feature tons and tons of progression systems that give our actions within a game system additional meaning. They're usually not played cooperatively, nor are they the type of games that huge communities form around. They are, however, also no games in which we compete against others. They are games that are played for the joy of the moment. But as we just tried to establish before, the joy of gameplay in the moment is probably not the main thing that draws us to games as adults. As adults, we're mostly drawn to games that give our actions within the game additional meaning in a greater context, cooperation, competition, or a bigger goal of progression. The things that we just speculated is also what is drawing us to sports. So adults are necessarily playing games for the joy of the moment, but you know who is more than happy to play a game for nothing more but the pure joy of the gameplay alone? Exactly. Kids and young teenagers, the main demographic for console games until the early 2000s. But as console gaming matured, the percentage of the audience that is actually drawn towards the kind of gameplay that 3D platformers provide grew smaller and smaller as a bigger and bigger part of the player base grew up. That's the main thing that I suspect is the reason why 3D platformers fell out of favor. But there is a second trend going on that starts in the early 2000s. Gaming consoles gained online functionality during this decade. Before the 2000s, online gaming was almost exclusive to the world of PC gaming. But by the 2010s, online gaming on consoles is pretty much the standard. And as the consoles gained online functionality, new types of games appeared on them as well. Games in which we play against or with other people online on a console for the very first time. A lot of competitive and cooperative games popped up as soon as consoles were connected to the World Wide Web. And this was probably the final nail for genres like the 3D platformer. Genres that carried the consoles in the years before. Or in other words, in the year 2000, the majority of console gamers are still children and teenagers, and the consoles are not connected to the internet. In 2010, the majority of gamers were adults, and online games are everywhere. And it is in these 10 years that the 3D platformer fell out of favor. Until we arrive at today, where the only 3D platformers that still sell are IPs that people played in their childhood, up to the point that sometimes a remake of a 20-year-old game far outsells a new entry in the series. The simple truth is that people, as a mass market, just are nowhere near as excited for a game like Astro Bot than they are for a game with lots of skill trees and progression systems and some form of crafting and multiplayer that can be played with or against friends, or, you know, FIFA, Call of Duty, GTA Online, Ark, or Rocket League, Fortnite, or even PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds. The games that people actually spend the most time in. Selling a game like Astro Bot is really difficult just because 3D platformers are not made of the things that the mass market is looking for in a game. I believe what people really look for in games is to interact with a set of rules that they can describe meaning to, most of the time via progression, cooperation, or competition, all things a 3D platformer can't provide. So far, so catastrophic. But things are actually even worse, because there is another problem plaguing the 3D platformer that we have not yet talked about, the reason why indies were not able to revive the genre. You see, there is a knife sticking in the cold body of the 3D platformer, a knife that is probably the true murder weapon that killed it for good, a knife dealing even more damage than the fact that people, as a whole, aren't that enthusiastic for the genre. And this knife is the fact that 3D platformers are expensive to develop. You see, it takes an insane amount of work to produce a 3D platformer that meets the expectations of the market. 3D platformers are expensive to make in almost every aspect. So when we talk about a game being expensive to produce, what we are effectively talking about is how many work hours it takes to produce the game. Manual labor is simply the most expensive part of a game's production, by far. So the thing that dictates how expensive a game is to produce is how many hours it takes to produce all assets needed for the game, how long it takes to animate all characters and gameplay elements, how much debugging there is to do until the game runs smoothly, how many complex gameplay elements there need to be coded and debugged, how many levels they have to build and playtest, and so on. And 3D platformers need a lot of all of this. A 3D platformer needs tons of different assets, it needs tons of characters and enemies that all fulfill different gameplay tasks, but they also have to be animated beautifully. The movement of the character needs to be really solid, but it's not only the character that moves. There are likely tons of gameplay elements that move the character as well, from wind gusts to moving platforms to springs to enemies that push us around, which makes debugging the whole thing a nightmare. And worst of all, most of the work that goes into making sure that the assets look great and work bug-free and are well animated is thrown away after a level or two. 3D platformers can't reuse gameplay elements that much, so we need a lot of assets that are beautifully animated, change the gameplay in some aspects and can't be reused often. Or in other words, a modern 3D platformer needs a ton of manual work hours to produce. A team of 4 or 5 people simply can't produce all the assets that a game like Mario Odyssey or Crash 4 require, which is probably the main reason why indies were not able to revive the genre, like they did with so many others. So yeah, that's it. 3D platformers are just a genre that does not really lend itself towards what adults as a mass market are seeking in games on the one side, but on the other side they're also really expensive to develop. So I guess apart from Mario and remakes of decade-old games, that's it. It's just not possible to make profitable 3D platformers in the gaming market currently. Even a game as beloved as Astro Bot ended up selling way less than Sony exclusive games usually do. It's a bit tragic, to be honest. It's sad, it's a catastrophe.
All of the things I wish I would have said or done to make you come back.
Except, well, I might not have told you the entire story so far, because as it turns out, things might not be as dire as they seem at first glance. And as it turns out, Astro Bot might not be a failure after all, because there is one thing about Astro Bot that we haven't talked about yet. Astro Bot was developed by a team of roughly 60 people over 3 years of development time. 60 people over 3 years is an extremely small team for a Sony exclusive game. Just for comparison, Guerrilla Games, the studio that exclusively produced the Horizon games over the past couple of years, has 400 employees. So all of this is really difficult to estimate, so please do me a favor and don't take this too seriously. But if we were to go by salaries per employee, then the entire game of Astro Bot cost about the same to produce as 6 months of development on Horizon Forbidden West cost Sony. And the development of Horizon Forbidden West took 4 years. Or as another example, the development of Spider-Man 2 famously cost Sony $300 million. If we assume that one developer on Astro Bot costs Sony roughly $100,000 per year, then Astro Bot cost $18 million to develop, less than a tenth of what they paid for Spider-Man 2. Astro Bot was really cheap to develop. And there is a reason why Astro Bot was so cheap to develop, because Astro Bot is not a AAA game. Astro Bot is a AA game. It is a game that was developed on a decent but not insanely high budget. And because of this, the game needs to sell way less copies to be a huge financial success. Because once the game has recouped its development costs, well, once that happens, a copy of Horizon or Spider-Man 2 and a copy of Astro Bot makes Sony the same amount of money. So I know what at least one of you is currently thinking, but didn't he just say that 3D platformers are so expensive to develop? To which I say, yes. And this is where things become interesting again, because Astro Bot used its limited resources in a very clever way to make it possible to produce the game on a limited budget. You see, Astro Bot just made clever use of its limited resources. For example, most enemies in the game are repeated often, but the enemies are not only reused, they are also incredibly simple to animate. Most of them are just a walking head with a display for a face. The sand or the grass that Astro walks over is reused often. Many assets and textures reappear in differently colored variants, so do most of the walls. A lot of gameplay elements are reused several times in a unique context. Many assets in the game are reused more than once, but the assets are not only reused, they are also quite simple. While everything on display is masterfully crafted, barely any asset is particularly complex. The enemies don't have complex attack patterns or animations. Astro's attacks aren't terribly fancy either, neither is the level geometry or the backgrounds. Things like trees or rocks are simple but effective assets. If there is something in the game that looks like it took a ton of effort to craft, then it is usually the central gimmick of a level, but the game almost never wastes precious resources on things that are not front and center. The team just made really clever use of their limited manpower and only focused on the things that really matter when playing the game, without losing countless work hours for things like one-off enemy animations or backdrop designs. The game is just razor focused on the things that truly matter. So there is a lot of talk going on currently about the question of whether modern AAA games are becoming too expensive to develop and whether publishers should cut costs and deliver smaller, more AA titles that are developed by fewer people and aimed at smaller audiences. And the short answer to both of those questions is, well, yes. Exploding development costs mean that publishers can only focus on the most safe types of games, using only the most safe types of franchises for only the broadest market possible, because a single failed project causes devastating losses. But this means in return that at least all Western publishers are all developing the exact same game all the time, either story-driven, third-person action-adventure games or the next live service game. Just to give you one number to understand how massive live service games are. Marvel's Spider-Man is the best-selling game on the PlayStation 4. This game sold about 20 million copies. On the 4th of November, Fortnite cracked its record for unique players on a single day. On this day alone, over 44 million people played Fortnite. Even the most successful single-player games dwarf in comparison to how many hours cooperative or competitive live service games are played. Live service games are the games that rake in by far the most playtime, and thus every publisher wants to have several of them. And when it comes to the single-player games that sell the most, well, those are story-driven, third-person action-adventure games. Just to give you another example, out of the 10 best-selling games on the PlayStation 4, 9 are third-person action-adventures. 9 out of 10 are in the same genre, and thus every big player in the industry either wants to produce the next live service game or the next big third-person action-adventure. But if all the big publishers are working on incredibly similar games, then people sooner or later will get tired of this type of game. It's a bit like what is happening in Hollywood with superhero movies. That's just not sustainable in the long run. But companies, being companies, don't change course as long as they do not see someone else make a lot of money with something they do not do, which is where things become interesting, because as a matter of fact, Astro Bot is about to make Sony a ton of money. Astro Bot was developed on such a tight budget that it will be printing money, even if it only ends up selling a quarter of what Spider-Man 2 sold. And given how much people love the game, I think Astro Bot has a decent chance to end up selling a lot more than that, just because of word of mouth in the long run. But Astro Bot isn't necessarily lightning in a bottle. The foundations upon which this game is built are repeatable. It's a smaller team with a shorter dev cycle, developing a game in a genre that hasn't seen much love in recent years, while taking shortcuts on most parts of the game, but the most important ones. That's something that can be done with a lot of genres and franchises that fell out of favor. You know, there are tons of genres that have been neglected by the big names in industry, games that have a potential audience, but that are in genres that aren't big enough to reach the entire mass market. Games that, up until now, were almost exclusively left to indie developers. But there's just no reason for big publishers not to develop games in those genres as well. All that they need to do is to let smaller teams loose on them in shorter development cycles. Smaller teams that are clever about how they use their resources. Exactly the thing that Astro Bot did. Astro Bot, a game that just threw on the money printing press for Sony. At least in my humble onion, there is a decent chance that Astro Bot may be the beginning of a very healthy trend for the industry. So, At the beginning of the video, I mentioned a strange phenomenon in the world of 3D platformers. The strange fact that people seem to be more than happy to buy platformers again that they played in their childhood, while people at the same time don't seem to be interested in buying a new game in the exact same genre. 3D platformers seem to sell a lot more copies if they are remakes of games that people played in their childhood, if they are games that people are nostalgic for, then new 3D platformers seem to sell. Or in other words, it appears that people still love the games of their childhood, even today, even if those games are in genres they do no longer play. Which brings us to the second reason why Sony probably greenlit Astro Bot in the first place, and the second reason why I think the future of 3D platformers might look brighter than it may appear at first glance. You see, when we talk about the fact that people seem to only love platformers that they played as a child, then it is easy to miss a crucial aspect of the discussion. The very fact that people played those games in their childhood. The fact that there were games for kids on a PlayStation back in the day. Games that left such a lasting impact on the kids of the 2000s that even today, 20 years later, those now grown-up kids still want to buy those exact games in the millions. You see, it is crucial for Sony's long-term success that the kids of today fall in love with games on their console and fall in love with Sony's franchises. Because there is a good chance that a kid that falls in love with a game like Astro Bot today ends up becoming a lifelong customer of Sony for the rest of their lives. Over the past couple of years, Sony has completely neglected to develop games for children on their platform. They pretty much solely focused on giving their existing audience the ever same game that they wanted. And while this strategy was successful for Sony in the short run, in the long run, it is bound to cause them severe problems. They need to get kids to play games on their console. They need kids to fall in love with their franchises. And to do that, they need games on the platform that kids can enjoy, that are so good that kids do their kids thing and terrorize their parents for so long until they buy them a PlayStation. I think one of the main reasons why Sony even greenlit Astro Bot in the first place is because they realized that they are losing the kids entirely to Nintendo, which is a problem for them, because when those kids turn 16, Sony would love it if the kids were to buy a PlayStation. A hard sell if they never played a game on the platform up to this point. Sony probably realized that they lack family-friendly games. Games that ensure that their customers of tomorrow fall in love with their franchises today. And a game like Astro Bot is perfect to help with this. And now this very game, which they probably mainly greenlit to make sure that there are more family-friendly games on the platform, to make sure that they are future-proof. Now this investment into the far future is likely already printing them a lot of money in the now. You see, I believe that there are actually a lot of reasons to be optimistic that Astro Bot does not end up being lightning in a bottle, but that Sony will try to recreate this success. And if Sony manages to pull it off again, then other publishers will soon follow. So the future of the 3D platformer might be a lot brighter than it first appears. Hooray! So here we have it, a lengthy essay about why it is a bad idea to hang an animal cadaver off a bridge. Before we wrap this up, just a couple more things. So first, as always, a gigantic Pac-Man reviving thank you to all my wonderful Patreons whose names are currently scrolling by. Videos like this one, and long-form content in general, have a really tough time surviving on YouTube, and the wonderful people whose names are currently scrolling by are making sure that videos like this one can still somehow exist. A huge thanks for that. Second, a thing that I wanted to discuss but that didn't fit into the script. You see, right around the time that Astro Bot released, Sony threw another game onto the market, Concord. You see, Concord was Sony's big push to launch the big next live service game. And by push, I do mean push. It took them 8 years to develop the game. It allegedly cost them around $400 million to develop it. They put in an insane amount of resources to create a new gigantic live service franchise. A game to take on the Fortnites and Overwatches of the world. And then they released their great project. And as fate wanted it, they released it right around the time they released Astro Bot. And Astro Bot managed to outsell the game with ease. Concord only sold around 25,000 copies. The game was such a flop that Sony shut down the servers after only a couple of weeks. The whole project buried hundreds of millions of dollars. Meanwhile, Astro Bot is probably far exceeding what Sony originally planned for the game to gross. This is the third reason why I think there is a reason to be optimistic that bigger publishers might soon start to experiment with smaller budget games in smaller genres, instead of all of them trying to chase the exact same trend that is long saturated. Awesome. And with this, it is time for us to wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, leaving a thumbs up is what Astro Bot would do. If you're interested in more long-form content discussing games, subscribing might be a good idea. And if you truly enjoyed the video and want to make sure that content like this can survive on the platform, then there's also the option to support the channel via Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, lots of hugs.